Lily Harper is many things: organized, efficient, perpetually caffeinated, and apparently a compulsive liar under pressure. When her insufferable ex-boyfriend, Derek Walsh, corners her at a company reunion party with that signature smirk and an obvious plan to worm his way back into her life, Lily does the only logical thing. She panics, grabs the nearest warm body, and announces to the entire room that she has a boyfriend. The problem? The nearest warm body belongs to Nathaniel Cole, her cold, impeccably dressed, absolutely not warm CEO boss, who looks at her the way most people look at a misfiled spreadsheet. By Monday morning, Lily expects a termination letter. Instead, she gets a proposition. Nathaniel's board has been pressuring him to seem more human. A fake relationship for 6 months, public appearances, the occasional lunch, and absolutely no catching feelings. Keeps Derek away and gets Nathaniel's investors off his back. Simple. Welcome to Flustered novel, where love is chaotic, confessions are awkward, and every story comes with butterflies, drama, and a little emotional damage. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's romance story. I have a strict personal policy against making scenes at company events. I also have a strict personal policy against lying, eating carbs after 9 p.m., and responding to texts from Derek Walsh. I'd like to formally report that all 4 policies collapsed on the same evening, which I think says more about Derek than it does about me. The Hartwell Group's annual reunion mixer was exactly the kind of event I'd have happily skipped if my job description didn't include attends all mandatory company functions in the fine print. The venue was a rooftop bar in Midtown, all Edison bulbs, exposed brick, and people who'd convinced themselves they were networking when they were really just drinking with name tags. I was wearing heels that had seemed reasonable at 7 p.m. and were committing small crimes against my feet by 8:30. I was doing beautifully, actually. I'd circulated, smiled at the right people, refreshed my drink twice, and was fully prepared to sneak out by 9 under the cover of a fake phone call. I had the fake phone call scripted. I'd even picked which contact to fake dial. My dentist, Dr. Paulson, who I was fairly confident wouldn't answer on a Friday night. Then I turned around, and Derek Walsh was standing 4 feet away from me. He looked exactly the same, which felt deeply unfair given the 9 months I'd spent eating my body weight in pasta and convincing myself I was healing. Same dimple. Same slightly too confident jawline. Same expression that said I know you missed me before he'd even opened his mouth. Lily, he said, like my name was a thing he'd invented. Derek. I said it the way you say a word you've already Googled and don't need the definition for. You look incredible. He was already moving closer, doing that thing where he angled his body to cut off the rest of the room, which I'd once found charming and now recognized as a technique. I was hoping you'd be here. I actually wanted to talk to you. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about us, about where things went. There is a phenomenon I've read about where, in moments of extreme stress, the human brain bypasses rational thought entirely and goes directly to survival instinct. Fight. Flight. Or apparently in my case, a third option that scientists haven't named yet, which is, grab the man standing closest to you and start talking. I turned 45 degrees. Nathaniel Cole was standing approximately 2 feet to my left, holding a glass of scotch, speaking to no one, and radiating the distinct energy of a man who found this entire event mildly offensive. My mouth moved before my brain filed the appropriate paperwork. Sorry to interrupt, I said, touching his arm. There you are. I looked back at Derek with a smile I hoped read as blissfully happy rather than actively unraveling. Derek, this is my boyfriend. The word boyfriend fell out of my mouth like a pen off a desk, suddenly, irreversibly on the floor. Nathaniel Cole turned and looked at me. His expression did not change. Not 1 millimeter. He looked at Derek, then back at me, and for one terrible second I was certain he was going to say something that ended my career. Instead, he slid his arm around my shoulders, easy and unhurried, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. Nathaniel, he said, extending his hand to Derek. How do you two know each other? He said it with a calm so complete it bordered on supernatural. I smiled at Derek, my heart attempting to exit through my ribcage, and thought, I am so fired. I did not sleep. Not even a little. Not even the polite, unrefreshing 40 minutes that technically count as sleep if you're being generous with definitions. I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling with the specific, crystalline alertness of someone who had completely destroyed her own life, and was waiting for the rubble to settle. The full inventory of what had happened played on a loop with the cheerfulness of a true crime podcast. I had lied To my ex-boyfriend. Using my boss as a prop. My boss who was, and I want to be precise here, Nathaniel Cole, CEO of the Hartwell Group. A man who communicated primarily in clipped sentences and meaningful silences. A man who had once made a junior analyst cry simply by looking at his quarterly projections. A man whose idea of warmth was occasionally using 2 syllables where one would do. A man who had, without any visible hesitation, put his arm around me and backed up my lie to Derek's face. That last part was what kept me blinking at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Because he hadn't had to do that. He could have smiled politely and excused himself. He could have looked at me the way people look at loose wiring, concerning, better handled by someone else. He could have let Derek have his triumphant little moment, and then quietly had HR process my dismissal on Monday. He hadn't. After Derek made some excuse and relocated across the rooftop, Nathaniel had lowered his arm, picked up his scotch, and said 3 words. Well done. Convincing. Then he'd walked away and spoken to the CFO for 20 minutes like nothing had happened. Well done. Convincing. Was that good? Was that threatening? Was that the corporate equivalent of we'll deal with this Monday? I had rotated those 3 words so many times they'd lost all meaning by 4 a.m. By 7:30, I'd showered, dressed in what I privately called my professional body armor. A blazer so well structured it could survive a board meeting or a firing, and arrived at the office 40 minutes early, which was my usual time, because I was above all else, consistent in my anxiety. I sat at my desk outside Nathaniel's office and opened my computer, reorganized my inbox, reorganized it again, made coffee, poured the coffee out because it tasted like regret, made more coffee. At 8:59 the elevator opened. Nathaniel Cole walked in looking precisely the way he always looked, like someone had sculpted a person specifically for the purpose of heading corporations. Dark suit, no tie today, which I'd privately learned meant he had internal meetings only. He carried nothing. He never carried anything. It was one of his many inexplicable CEO affectations, as if briefcases were beneath him, and his brain simply stored everything on its own private server. He crossed the floor, stopped at my desk. I stood up. We looked at each other for approximately 1 geological era. My office, he said. Yes, I said. Obviously. Sure. He turned and I followed him, clutching my tablet like a shield, already composing a resignation letter in my head that opened with Dear Mr. Cole, effective immediately. He sat behind his desk. I sat across from him. He looked at me. You have an ex-boyfriend, he said. Not a question. An observation delivered the way someone might note an unexpected variable in an equation. Unfortunately, I said. He attends company events. Apparently, he has a contact in the acquisitions department. I didn't know he'd be there. I'm very sorry about last night. I panicked and I completely understand if I'd like to propose an arrangement. I stopped talking. I am sorry. He set down his pen, which he'd been holding without using, another thing about Nathaniel that I'd stopped questioning. My board has been expressing concern about my public image. The word they used in February was inaccessible. He said the word the way someone says a rude thing a child told them. It's affecting investor confidence. My head of PR has been suggesting I demonstrate some evidence of a personal life. I stared at him. You want to use me? Mutually, he said. Your ex returns your calls, I assume. Like a homing pigeon. You need a convincing reason for him to stop. I need something to show my board. He looked at me steadily. 6 months. A handful of public appearances. Nothing complicated. At the end, the relationship ends amicably and quietly. You keep your position, receive a 15% salary increase, and never have to speak to your ex-boyfriend again. The room was very quiet. This is insane, I said. Yes, he said, as if I'd correctly identified the weather. Do you want to do it anyway? I thought about Derek's dimple. I thought about the 9 months of pasta. I looked at Nathaniel Cole, composed, impossible, faintly absurd, and thought, this is either the best decision of my life or the worst one. And I have genuinely no way to tell. I have conditions, I said. He opened a desk drawer, produced a legal pad, and slid it across to me. Write them down. The list of conditions became, by the end of Tuesday, a 4-page document. This was not my fault. I'd started with 6 perfectly reasonable items. Public appearances only, no lying to immediate family, no physical contact beyond what's socially necessary. Communications go through my personal phone, not the work system. a clear exit timeline, and the right to veto any event that required me to wear something described as nautical. Nathaniel had read them, made no expression and said, "Counter-proposal." And then his conditions arrived the next morning via a printed memo from his assistant, and that's when it became a negotiation. By Wednesday we had a document. It covered the frequency of public appearances, no more than twice monthly, one of which could be a work event, the handling of questions about how we met, a variation of the truth, we met at work, with no further elaboration required, physical contact parameters, hand-holding approved, arm around the shoulder approved, kissing, and I will note that the word kissing appeared in a legal memo and I had to take a full minute, permitted only if circumstances required it, and mutually agreed upon in the moment. Social media, 1 post per month maximum, no captions that described him as my love, which I had suggested as a joke and he had immediately added to the document as a prohibition, and what we called the exit clause, which outlined how, in month 6, we would quietly announce the relationship had ended due to scheduling and mutual respect. It was the most organized fake relationship in human history. On Thursday, I sat across from him during our regular 8 a.m. briefing, which had not changed at all because nothing about our professional dynamic was supposed to change, and went through his calendar, his correspondence, his 12:15 with the Singapore office, and his 4 o'clock with legal. "You're doing it again," he said. I looked up. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like I'm a problem you're calculating." "I'm not." I stopped. "I'm recalibrating. This is new. I'm allowed a recalibration period." "You have until Friday," he said. "After that, it becomes a liability. You can't give me a deadline on recalibrating." I just did. I looked at him. He looked at me. He had, I was beginning to understand, a very particular kind of patience. Not the warm kind. The kind that meant he would simply wait until the world caught up with wherever he already was. "Do you have a nickname?" I asked. He blinked. It was the closest thing to surprise I'd ever seen on him. "Why?" "Because if we're doing this, I can't call you Mr. Cole at a dinner party. It sounds like I'm your employee." "You are my employee." "At work. Outside I need something." I tapped my pen on my notepad. "People call you Nate sometimes." "I've heard it." "People I've known for years call me Nate." "Well." I spread my hands. "Here we are." He was quiet for a moment. "Fine," he said. "But not in this office." "Deal." I made a note. "Also, I need to know your coffee order. It would be suspicious if I didn't know your coffee order." "Black. No sugar." "Of course," I said, joyless. He looked at me. "The coffee," I said. I meant the coffee. Something happened at the corner of his mouth then, a micro-movement, barely a degree of change, gone before I could confirm it. I filed it under probably nothing and moved on to his 12:15. The first public appearance was scheduled for the following Friday, a charity dinner that he had already agreed to attend, and that would put us in front of exactly the kind of people his board cared about. I spent the rest of Thursday wondering how to look like I was in love with someone who scheduled his silences. By Friday, I decided I'd just look like myself, and hoped that was enough. The charity dinner was called an evening for the Aldrich Foundation, and it was the kind of event where everyone's shoes cost more than my rent, and the canapés were described on a printed menu that someone had designed, printed, and calligraphed just for the appetizers. Nathaniel met me in the lobby of the venue. He looked at me. I looked at him. We were doing this. "You look," he stopped. "Seem to recalculate something. That color suits you." I was wearing a deep wine red dress that I'd bought in a panic on Wednesday during my lunch break, and talked myself into via a very intense dressing room conversation with myself. "Thank you," I said. "You look like a CEO." "That's the goal." It wasn't entirely a compliment. He offered his arm, and I took it, and we walked into the most expensive room I'd been in since I'd gone on that misguided gallery date with Derek in 2022, and I pushed that thought away, because Derek was the whole reason I was here, arm in arm with a man who probably alphabetized his feelings. It went against all odds. Well, this was partly because Nathaniel Cole in a social setting was a different organism than Nathaniel Cole in an office. He didn't become warm, exactly, warmth was a stretch, but he became deliberate in a way that read, to the outside world, as attentive. He stood close. He answered questions about us with the precise minimum required, and let me fill in the rest, which turned out to be the right instinct because I, unlike him, could describe things with adjectives. "How long have you been together?" asked a woman named Patricia, who had a philanthropist's habit of maintaining intense eye contact. 8 months, I said at the exact same moment Nathaniel said 7 months. Brief pause. 7, I said. Almost 8. I round up. Patricia seemed delighted. Couples who argue about their anniversary. How real. Nathaniel glanced at me sideways. I looked back at him with enormous innocence. Later, when we'd moved on, he leaned down and murmured, "We need a consistent date." I said we did. I whispered back. "It's in the document. You said it was excessive." I said we didn't need that level of detail. And now we almost told Patricia 2 different things. He was quiet for a moment. I could feel him not agreeing with me, which was its own specific sensation. "Pick a date," he said quietly. "October 14th. Why? It's a Tuesday. Nobody expects something to start on a Tuesday. It sounds true." Another pause. "Fine," he said. "October 14th. We moved through the room. Someone's husband clapped Nathaniel on the shoulder and asked how the Hartwell Group was positioned going into Q3, which led to a 15-minute conversation I mostly smiled through. A woman from the Aldridge board told me I was radiant, which either said something wonderful about the dress or something concerning about my baseline, and I thanked her genuinely either way. At some point, a photographer from the foundation's PR team asked if they could take a photo of us for their newsletter. Nathaniel glanced at me. I thought of the clause in our document about documentation. "Of course," I said. Nathaniel put his arm around me. I leaned in slightly the way you do when you're not thinking about it. The camera went off. We stepped apart. "Good," the photographer said. "Very natural." We walked toward the dinner tables in silence. "October 14th, I said. "Yes," he said. "And you owe me an apology about the date document." "I'll consider it," he said. Which, I was learning, was the closest he came to yes. Month 3 arrived with the subtlety of a calendar notification. Hartwell Group Annual Executive Retreat, Napa Valley, Thursday through Sunday. I had attended the retreat every year in my capacity as executive assistant. I stayed in the staff accommodations, managed logistics, handled the A/V for the Saturday morning presentations, and spent Sunday on the shuttle back to SFO reading a novel and eating gas station gummy bears in peaceful anonymity. This year was different. This year, I was the CEO's girlfriend, which meant the staff accommodations were no longer on the table, because Nathaniel's head of PR, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Dara, had rearranged the room assignments before I could say anything, and I was now listed as occupying the second room in Nathaniel's 2-bedroom suite. 2-bedroom, I reminded myself. Every time the word suite made my brain spike. The drive from the airport to the vineyard was 40 minutes in a car Dara had arranged, and Nathaniel and I sat in the back with the professional distance of 2 people who spent their weekdays managing each other's calendar. He was reading something on his phone. I was looking out the window at Northern California being aggressively scenic. "The suite has 2 bedrooms, I said. "Yes," he said. I confirmed it when Dara sent the revision. "I just want to make sure we're both clear on that." He looked up from his phone. "Lily, I'm aware of the floor plan." "Great." I looked back out the window. Vineyards rolled past, gold and green, obscenely beautiful. "This is a lot of grapes." He made a sound. It took me a moment to identify it as a laugh, abbreviated, quickly contained, but undeniable. I turned and looked at him. He was looking back at his phone. "Did you just laugh?" I said. "No. Nate." He looked up again. Something happened in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a shift, like a window cracked open in a house that's usually closed. "It's a vineyard," he said. "That's typically what they contain." I know what vineyards contain. I was making conversation. You were making an observation about agricultural volume. That is conversation. For us. He considered this. Then fair. The retreat was, objectively speaking, the most beautiful 3 days I'd spent in memory. The vineyard was all rolling hills and oak trees. The evenings smelled like wood fires and whatever they put in expensive California air. And the dinners were exactly the kind of long, unhurried affairs where good wine made everyone temporarily more honest. On Friday night, after dinner, most of the executives drifted toward a fire pit on the terrace. Nathaniel and I ended up there too. Naturally, the way we'd fallen into these rhythms without planning them, always finding ourselves in the same proximate space. Someone handed me a glass of something I would later describe only as delicious and extremely responsible for what happened next. We were sitting side by side on a stone bench, near enough to the fire to be warm, and someone, the CFO, I think, asked how we'd really gotten together, because everyone knew the general outline by now but nobody had heard the actual story. I looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at me. And I want to be clear that this was the wine and the firelight and the general offense of Napa Valley being so beautiful, he said. She talked her way into a situation she couldn't talk her way back out of, and I decided to make it interesting. Everyone laughed. I laughed. And then I looked at him more carefully, because that was, in its compressed and unfair way, almost exactly true, and he was watching me with an expression I hadn't catalogued yet, something quiet and specific and not entirely distant. That sounds about right, I said. He looked at the fire. I looked at the fire. The CFO made a toast to love and quarterly earnings, and everyone drank, and I sat there in the Napa night thinking about how 6 months had felt like a very simple timeline 2 months ago, and now it was starting to feel like a thing with edges. We walked back to the suite at 11:30, said good night at our respective bedroom doors with the punctuality of a business transaction. I lay in the dark in the nicest bed I'd ever slept in and stared at the ceiling, and did not think about the window in his expression by the fire. I did not think about it for approximately 4 hours. Month 4 introduced a new variable, Simone Ashworth. Simone was a consultant brought in for the Hartwell Group's pending merger with a tech firm in Austin, and she was, objectively, extraordinary. She was tall, had the kind of composure that suggested she'd been born in a boardroom, and she had a way of talking to Nathaniel that involved leaning forward slightly, and saying things like, "I think you and I are aligned on this," Nathaniel in a voice that made a line sound like it meant several other things. She was not flirting with him. Probably. Maybe. I was at least 60% sure she was not flirting with him. The other 40% of me was having a small internal legal proceeding. "You're being weird," said my friend and colleague Jamie Chin, who sat 3 desks away and had been watching me watch the glass-walled conference room for 20 minutes. "I'm not being weird, I'm observing. You've reorganized your pen holder twice." I moved my pens back to their original positions. Simone is being very collaborative. That's her job, Lily. She's a consultant. She laughs at everything he says. Jamie turned to look. Does he say anything funny in there? No. That's the thing. Jamie spun fully around in her chair and looked at me with the energy of someone who has reached a conclusion. "Oh no," she said. "Don't. Oh, this is not good. Jamie, you have feelings." "I have concerns. About the professional optics of the merger process." I picked up a pen. "Put it down. Can we not? Lily." She lowered her voice. "You've been fake dating your boss for 4 months. Statistically nothing. It's a professional arrangement. You know his coffee order. That's my job. You mentioned his laugh to me twice last week. He laughed twice last week. It was notable. He doesn't usually laugh. You cataloged his laughs." I looked at her. She looked at me. The conference room door opened and Nathaniel walked out with Simone, who was saying something I couldn't hear, and gesturing in the way people gesture when they're being very compelling. He glanced across the floor. Found me immediately the way he always did. I'd noticed this and specifically not thought about it. He gave a micro nod. I gave one back. Simone said something else. He looked back at her. I looked at my computer. "I'm fine," I told Jamie. "You're not," she said, not unkindly. "I will be," I said, which felt like the more honest version. That evening, Nathaniel knocked on the open door of my office at 6:45, which was unusual. I looked up. "You're still here," he said. Statement, not question. Finishing the Austin briefing notes. I swiveled slightly in my chair. "Productive session with Simone?" "Thorough," he said. "She's good. She seemed very aligned with you." Something moved in his expression. "She's collaborative. It's professional." "I know." I said it the way you say something you're still deciding to believe. He stepped into the office, which he rarely did. I typically went to his, and sat in the chair across from my desk, which felt strange in the best and worst way. He looked at me for a moment. "Are you all right?" he said. "Not is something wrong with the briefing. Not are there items to review. Are you all right?" 3 words with more syllables than they needed. "I'm fine," I said, because it was the only thing I could say in an arrangement that had rules and clauses and an exit date. He nodded, stood, paused at the door. "The briefing notes can wait until morning," he said. "Go home. I'll finish." "Lily." He looked at me. "Go home." I went home. I spent the subway ride telling myself, firmly and with supporting evidence, that an employer telling his employee to go home was not a romantic gesture. It was management. It was workflow optimization. It was nothing. I was extremely unconvincing. Month 5. The Hartwell Group's Corporate Art Foundation hosted a gallery opening on a Wednesday evening in Chelsea. This fell under our public appearance quota. I wore a black dress I'd bought months ago but never had occasion for. Nathaniel wore a suit that was darker than his usual palette, and we arrived at the gallery as what we had spent 5 months carefully constructing. A convincing couple. We circulated. We spoke to donors. Nathaniel made a brief, precise speech about the foundation's work that somehow managed to be both accurate and not entirely lifeless. Someone served champagne in glasses that were aggressively thin. I ate approximately 11 canapés and did not apologize for any of them. At some point in the evening, we found ourselves standing in front of a large abstract painting, all deep blues and fractured gold. And neither of us had anyone else to speak to for approximately 4 minutes, which was, in the history of our arrangement, unusual. "Do you like it?" I asked. He looked at the painting. "I don't know enough about this style to like or dislike it meaningfully. It makes me feel something I don't have a name for." I looked at him sideways. That's an unexpectedly sincere answer. "You ask sincerely?" He glanced at me. "You always ask things like you actually want the answer." "I usually do. Most people in professional settings don't." "I'm not always in a professional setting with you anymore." The words were out before I'd edited them. I meant the fake relationship. I meant the dinners and the retreat, and the Tuesday evenings when I brought him the last rounds of meeting notes. And we'd somehow ended up talking for longer than the notes required. He looked at me. The gallery hummed gently around us. Someone across the room laughed at something. "No," he said. "You're not." We stood in front of the painting in silence for a moment that had a different texture than the silences in his office. Warmer. Less efficient. "October 14th, I said quietly. Not for any reason. He turned his head and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen him aim at a board member or a consultant or a quarterly projection. It was direct and unguarded and slightly undone. And it lasted for exactly long enough that my heart made a decision my brain hadn't approved. "Lily," he started. "There you are." Derek Walsh materialized at my elbow like a recurring nightmare in a blazer. I felt my spine turn to concrete. He was grinning. He'd apparently attended as a +1 of someone in the acquisitions department. Again, and he looked between us with the specific expression of a man who has been doubting something for months and is now recalibrating. "Still going strong, I see," Derek said, looking between us. "I'll be honest, I had my money on this being a bluff." "Terrible bet," Nathaniel said pleasantly. And then he did something that was not in the document. He turned to me, tilted my chin up with one finger, and kissed me. Not performatively. Not briefly. The kind of kiss that does not have a professional rationale. When we separated, and I was going to need a considerable amount of time to process the fact that we separated, which implied a together that preceded it, Derek had slightly less to say. "Right," Derek said. "Well, good to see you both." He left, possibly to reconsider his life. I was in no position to track it. I looked at Nathaniel. He was looking at me. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a full geological era. "That wasn't in the document," I said. "I know," he said. "Were the circumstances requiring?" He looked at me steadily. "I think so," he said. "Yes." I turned back to the painting. The blues and fractured gold hadn't changed, but everything around them seemed slightly rearranged. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. We stayed at the gallery for another 40 minutes. He stood a degree closer than usual for the rest of the evening. I did not move away. We did not talk about the kiss. This was, in retrospect, our collective greatest professional error. And we worked for a corporation, so the competition was stiff. We didn't talk about it on Thursday. We didn't talk about it on Friday. We completed our regular briefings and calendar reviews and afternoon correspondence sessions with the precision of two people who have agreed, telepathically and without consent, to walk past a very large thing in the road and pretend it's not there. By the following Wednesday, the not talking had acquired its own terrible gravity. It came apart on a Thursday afternoon, as things tend to, during a completely unrelated conversation about his schedule for December. "You have the Aldridge board dinner on the 14th, I said. "Which is the end of the arrangement." He said it flatly, factually. Like reading an expiration date. I looked up from my tablet. He was looking at his desk. Month 6, I said. Yes. We should begin managing the transition, he said. The announcement that the relationship has ended. The exit clause specifies. I know what the exit clause specifies. My voice was slightly sharper than the occasion required. I wrote it. He was quiet. Is that what you want? I asked. I kept my voice professionally neutral, which was the hardest thing I'd done in 5 months of a fake relationship. It's what we agreed to. That's not what I asked. He looked up then. Really looked at me. The way he'd looked at the painting, the way he'd looked at me in the Napa firelight, and I thought, he's going to say yes, this is what he wants, and I am going to walk out of this office with my exit clause and my 15% salary increase, and I am going to eat so much pasta. What are you asking me? He said. Quiet. Careful, the way he was careful with things that mattered. I'm asking whether the arrangement is the only thing keeping this going. I set down my tablet. Because if it is, if I'm a strategy, Nate, I need to know that. So I can stop. I stopped. Stop what? Recalibrating, I said. I've been recalibrating for 5 months. I'm exhausted. He stood up, walked around the desk, stopped in front of me, close enough that the proximity had nothing to do with professional norms, and I held very still because I had spent 5 months learning the language of his silences, and I did not want to interrupt this one. You are not a strategy, he said. Very clearly, like a correction entered into official record. Then what am I? The most disruptive variable I have ever encountered. He said it without complaint. I don't know what to do with the amount of attention I spend on you. I scheduled 3 meetings last month at times I knew would overlap with yours, so I could justify having you in the room. He looked faintly outraged at himself. That's irrational. I don't do irrational. You once sent a memo about the correct way to organize a pen holder. That was practical. You do irrational sometimes, I said. It's one of your better qualities. He looked at me. You have to stop saying things like that. Or what? Or I'm going to do something that isn't in any document. He said it like a warning, which it was. Also like an offer. Nate, I said. I was never going to ask for the exit clause. The silence that followed was not the office kind. He closed the remaining distance, and this time there was no Derek Walsh, no gallery, no audience. Just 2 people who had spent 5 months running a very elaborate experiment, and finally arriving at what all the data had been pointing toward. The December board dinner arrived. I wore the wine red dress, the original one, from the Aldridge event, which had started all of this in a way, because that was the night the photographer had said very natural, and I'd stood half a degree closer than the document required. Nathaniel met me in the lobby of the venue. He looked at me. I looked at him. We had been doing this exact thing for 6 months, and it still had the same quality it had always had. The full attention of it, the specificity. You look, he paused. Then, without the diplomatic recalibration, beautiful. You look like a CEO, I said. Still not a compliment. Still not entirely not one. He smiled. Properly. It was still a relatively modest smile, because he was still Nathaniel Cole, but it was real and complete and aimed at me, which made it, in my current estimation, the best smile in the Northern Hemisphere. We went inside. The dinner was the kind of long, successful evening that happens when you've stopped being afraid of the room. We knew these people now. Or some of them. Patricia was there and asked how the anniversary had been. And we told her October 14th had been wonderful, because it had been. It had been a quiet Tuesday dinner that wasn't on any itinerary and hadn't been planned by anyone. And it was one of the best evenings of the past 6 months. At some point, Nathaniel's board chair, a compact man named Ellsworth who'd been in private equity since before I was born, pulled me aside and said, "Good for him, you know. He's been easier this year." Easier? I said. He laughs now, Ellsworth said. 3 times at the November meeting. I counted. Previous record was 0. I looked across the room at Nathaniel, who was speaking to someone from the Austin merger team, and was not currently laughing but was, I noted, wearing an expression that didn't look like a door. "I'll tell him you're proud," I said. Ellsworth laughed. "Don't tell him anything from me. He'll make it a KPI." On the way home, in the car, our car, the one that had become our car sometime in month 4 without an announcement, Nathaniel was quiet in the way that meant he was thinking, not absent. "The board seems satisfied," I said. "Yes. A beat. Ellsworth asked me about our plans. Plans. Going forward. Whether this was, he paused. Serious. I looked out the window at the city sliding past. What did you tell him? I told him I'd been trying to work out what to do with the amount of attention I spend on something for the first time in 10 years, he said. He seemed to find that sufficient. I turned to look at him. That's the most feelings you've expressed to a third party since I've known you. He's the board chair. He needed data. Nate. Lily. Are you trying to tell me something? He looked at me. The city moved past. He reached over and took my hand, without announcement, without a clause or a condition, and held it with the same deliberateness he gave everything that mattered. I'm trying to tell you, he said, that I'd like to not invoke the exit clause. I looked at our hands. That was already the plan. Good. He looked forward. You could have mentioned it earlier. I did. Multiple times. You kept reviewing the document. I was being thorough. You were being avoidant. I was being. He stopped. Something that was more than a window cracking, something closer to a whole wall coming down. Yes, he said. I was being avoidant. I held his hand and looked at the city and thought about October 14th, and galleries and Napa, and 4 pages of conditions that had managed, improbably, to have a loophole in them all along. Nothing about this arrangement prevents any of it from being real. Nate, I said. Yes. I'm done recalibrating. His hand tightened around mine. Thank goodness, he said. Finally. Epilogue. 14 months later. The thing about Nathaniel Cole is that he doesn't do things halfway. This I knew professionally from day one. The memos. The metrics. The pen holder memo, which I have for the record, framed and hung in the apartment that became our apartment in month 8, and which he pretends to find annoying and which I have observed him showing to exactly 2 people who came to dinner, with what I can only describe as quiet pride. 14 months after the rooftop reunion where I grabbed the closest available warm body, and accidentally built a life. Derek Walsh sent a text. Hey, I heard you and Cole are actually together. Good for you, I guess. Funny how things work out. I showed it to Nathaniel over Saturday morning coffee. Black, no sugar, joyless, perfect. And he read it, made an expression that might have been I told you so, and might have been I don't require an I told you so, and handed the phone back. Are you going to respond? He asked. I'm thinking. I set the phone face down on the counter, picked up my coffee, looked at him across the kitchen in the Saturday light. No, I said. I don't think I need to. He nodded, went back to the section of the paper he'd been reading, reached over, without looking up, and tucked a strand of hair out of my face with the absent ease of someone who has done this often enough that it's stopped being a decision. Good call, he said. It turned out, not the worst decision I ever made, grabbing a man in a moment of panic and announcing him as my boyfriend. It is, in fact, in my current top 5. Possibly top 3. I would rank it below meeting Jamie Chun, who is my greatest professional ally, and tied with buying the wine red dress, which is still in the wardrobe and which Nathaniel has never once mentioned, but has a very specific way of looking at. The exit clause, if you were wondering, is still in the document. We have not deleted it. Nathaniel suggested once that we should, and I said I thought it was good to keep it, because it's a reminder of where we started. And he said that was sentimental, and I said yes, that's correct, that's the point, and he looked at me for a long moment, and then made us both coffee, and that was the end of that conversation. Some things, it turns out, don't need an exit clause. Some things are not agreements. Some things are just true, the way October 14th is true, and vineyards are true, and the way a man who alphabetizes his emotions can still, given the right variable, smile like all the windows are open. I know his coffee order. I know his laugh. All 3 recorded varieties, plus 4 new ones that weren't in the dataset when Jamie started counting. I know which silences mean I'm thinking and which mean I'd like you to stay and which mean don't push it, Lily. And I know that the most organized fake relationship in human history was never, at any point, entirely fake. It just needed a few months to finish the paperwork. Thanks for spending time with Flustered Novel. If this story made you laugh, blush, or scream at the characters, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and come back for more chaotic romance stories. See you in the next novel.